As promised, here is part 2 of conception, pregnancy and birth, focusing specifically on conception and different methods of preventing pregnancy and also becoming pregnant. So we will click through the slides that we covered in part 1 and we'll go to conception. And so different ways to have control over conception and pregnancy. One of the things that often is important to people's psyche is being able to control or have some feeling of ownership over different decisions in their life. And so birth control options are kind of go with part of that psyche. And so there's some options for control in regards to becoming pregnant or if you are pregnant. They involve contraception and also induced abortion. So looking at contraception, 62% of women of reproductive age, so after you've had your menstrual cycle, use some form of contraception. And so if we remember the charts in the book, there is a ton of different methods of contraception. So varying from the very basic, just breastfeeding was the first one that's mentioned. And so with breastfeeding, different hormones are in place, estrogen production is reduced. And so if you're exactly perfect in your breastfeeding, there's a 2% failure rate to that. And so it's not recommended because most women cannot follow the exact perfect breastfeeding recommendations to prevent pregnancy. But it's free and it doesn't involve having to get a prescription from your doctor, all those different things. But the cons to it is it's just almost unrealistic for women to adhere to that to not become pregnant. And with a lot of the contraception methods, they might prevent pregnancy, but they don't necessarily prevent sexually transmitted infections. And so there's some positives to it if you don't want to get pregnant, but there's also recommendations that you should use multiple forms of contraception to prevent having the STIs as well. And so contraceptions can't be looked at solely as a pregnancy prevention method, but it's also looked at a prevention from STIs as well. I think the concerning thing for me, and I wanted to mention that, is that approximately 214 million people in low-income countries, so not just United States, so globally, for women who do not want to become pregnant, they do not have access to the contraceptive methods that are highly mentioned in the book, specifically medical interventions. So having the birth control pill, having a shot of the birth control medication, having the IUDs, those are not widely available to all people in the population. And so there's some consideration there from that social justice piece, like what can we do to make sure that birth control doesn't become a piece of privilege and that it's universally offered to everyone who wants to have that choice and have that self-determination. Income and class status should not be a factor in having access to something that women or even males all universally want. And so I think that's an alarming number, and it's something to take into consideration and to think about when we're in a role as a social worker who's looking for social justice and advocating for change. Is this an area that should be advocated for? And so that all individuals who want birth control and contraceptive methods have access to it. It's just something to consider. Another option for control would be considered induced abortion. Research shows highly restricted abortion laws do not actually, in fact, lead to fewer abortions. This was obviously a very debated, discussed, explored topic in the latest presidential election, because one candidate had a more open and fluid view that abortion should be legalized, and the other candidate had a very concrete perception that abortion is wrong and should not be allowed. And so we find, especially in West Michigan and in more religious circles, that abortion tends to be a topic that people vote primarily on. And so if one candidate has the beliefs that they have about abortion. So typically that abortion should be illegal. That will be for lack of a better word, the trump card that people vote off of, and that they focus on that issue, even if they don't agree with a candidate's other views. They will view primarily on there because it's a very, very passionate topic for people. And so there's legal and ethical issues around terminating pregnancy after fetal viability. And so the term fetal viability is just basically saying at what point the baby could survive out of the womb, which is typically medically looked at as entering into the second trimester. So that would be at that 13, 14-week period. Fetuses are looked at as being viable and that they could survive out of the womb, obviously with a lot of medical interventions in a neonatal type setting. But there's that, people start to look at that, okay, if they could survive out of the womb, is that considered murder? Are you terminating a life? It goes back to the conversation. If you have the belief of life starting at conception, or does life start once the fetus exits the womb? And so that kind of drives some people's perspectives on there. The book outlined there's a difference between medical and surgical abortions, and so sometimes there's a medical necessity indicated that the fetus is not viable and it's causing harm to the mother's well-being and ability to survive as well, and so that there must be a medical abortion occurring in order to have the mother survive. And so there's a lot of ethical conversation around this because it's not necessarily black and white. There's a lot of conversation. Should be abortion be permitted in the case of rape or incest? Is that permissible because the way the child was conceived was against someone's will? You'll find here in West Michigan, we have two agencies right next door to each other downtown. We have Planned Parenthood right next door to the Pregnancy Resource Center. And so two agencies that are targeting the same population, so pregnant mothers, but having two different, very, very different approaches. Planned Parenthood is a big proponent of women's choice and rights and will perform the surgical abortions. Pregnancy Resource Center believes in the sanctity of life and that they want to preserve the pregnancy and then empower the mothers to make the choice towards adoption or continuing the pregnancy and having the child on their own. And so two very different stances. I like to use that example because sometimes as social workers, topics or areas of discussion or clientele might go against what we ethically believe, but we still have the duty to give our clients self-determination. And if it just doesn't feel like something that you can do, it goes against your religious beliefs, your own ethical beliefs, there's options to still practice within the context of social work. So let's say your stance is you could not support abortion in any shape or form. And so working at Planned Parenthood would probably not be the best option for you. You can still work and get in a place that gives women options. And that would be the Pregnancy Resource Center. And so it's just something to consider. There's a lot of gray area with social workers and your own personal beliefs and ethics. And so just knowing that there's options and that there's ways to navigate, that you're still aligning with the code of ethics and your own personal beliefs, and still giving clients dignity and self-worth. So when talking about birth control, I want to link it back to the dimensions. So just some quick ones to think about. Obviously, I think birth control could probably influence all the different dimensions, but I'm just thinking specifically about some. So spiritual, that can go into the religious beliefs if they believe that birth control is permissible or not. And if it is not, or they or your religion does not believe in sex outside of marriage, how does that impact sex education for teenagers? So I went to a private Christian school, and our sex education curriculum was abstinence only. And so is that giving self-determination to teenagers? Is it providing all of the education possible so that they do choose to have sex outside of marriage? Do they know their options to prevent sexual transmitted disease, prevent pregnancy, or is it there's the belief that that encourages sexual activity if you have all the information? Again, not a black and white kind of area to talk about. Birth control can obviously impact your biological system. There's hormones associated with birth control, so that can have an impact on the female's body of mood fluctuation, low sex drive, hair loss, all different types of things. And so that's important to know because that can impact relationships with a significant other, with family, with even with themselves, that tying in kind of that psychological piece. Cultural. And so again, that kind of has that spiritual and religious piece, but culture can drive birth control options and availability, and the maybe if it's taboo or if it's accepted. Families, obviously, if you have this can dictate family size, readiness for a couple to have a child in the beginning of their marriage relationship. It kind of, obviously, conception forms a family when you have a baby, and so birth control can impact timing of that, the size, the readiness, those different things. And then diets, I kind of mentioned. We talked about partner relationships. So like maybe one person is ready for a baby, the other person is not. Who gets the say in birth control? Often birth control falls onto the female because there's more medical options for females. There are options, obviously, to control the male, like through condoms and spermicide. But a lot of times it's looked at the women to be in charge of the birth control. There could be manipulation between the partners if the male partner is not ready to have family, but the female is, and stopping the birth control without the male partner's knowledge. What does that look like? How does that factor in control for all parties in the relationship? And so I think the biggest diet is looking at is kind of the romantic relationship or the sexual relationship, and how birth control can take away power from one, give power to some, and those different types of things. So that's contraception methods and kind of the dimensions that they may impact. And so why is it important for us as social workers to know about contraception options? I don't think it's expected that all of us are going to be sex experts that will know all of the birth control options like the back of our hand, that will be able to refer clients left and right to use this one or that one. So there's a medical piece that doctors need to deal with. But it's really important because there's a lot of self-determination that falls around contraception. And so, like I said before, contraception is helping individuals or couples or whoever seek control over something. And so that's giving them that self-determination of when they want to have a child, when they don't want to have a child, who they want to have a child with, how old they want to be when they have a child. And so there's so many pieces tied into contraception that has that self-determination piece. And as social workers, we're responsible for giving our clients all the information that they can have so they have informed consent, and they can make decisions based on all of the knowledge. And so some individuals who don't believe that abortion is ethical or right, they'll still work in settings that provide abortions because they believe strongly that each individual should have self-determination and be given all of the information to make the decision that they want versus what a social worker is imposing on them based on their ethical beliefs. And so for me personally, I think that that's the biggest piece about social workers needing to have some awareness that there are contraception options, and being able to equip and refer their clients to the appropriate source to be able to get access, fair and equal access, kind of reduce some of those barriers that might be in place because of economics.